What's up, gang? What the fuck is going on? Holy shit. I wasn't planning to do this. I really wasn't. And I've still got a stream scheduled for tomorrow that will be maybe a little more coherent than this shit right now. But I don't know if you're tracking the uh shit's going crazy in Trump world, or in like Trump world's intersection with my world, you know? So I had a piece in the UnDiplomatic Newsletter that I published last night at like 1 in the morning my time, but it was, I don't know, 7 a.m. in DC, something like that. So the piece it was called Trumperialism, and it's more prescient even. I mean, I thought I was right when I wrote it, but it's even more prescient than I thought it was at the time when I wrote it, just yesterday. So this is the piece. Let me see if I can get this up for y'all. Yeah. So kind of crazy. This looks like a bunch of shit. Here we go. So the piece is about Trump's imperialist foreign policy, which is a theme that I've detected in Trump's campaign. It's a theme that has emerged even more strongly as he has started making political appointments and making speeches. And when you actually take seriously the sort of intellectual content of the people around Trump, or the people glomming on to Trump, like the national conservatives, the sort of MAGA policy movement, if you want to think of that, it's a bunch of elite counter-revolutionaries or whatever. There's more to say about that, but basically it's fucking imperialism, like over and over and over, not as a pejorative, but like as like, this is our foreign policy, dude. And so I wrote this piece to flag the data points that are massing, and it was triggered by this tweet that you see here on the screen from Trump, right? He's talking about the Panama Canal. Why the fuck is he talking about the Panama Canal? Because the United States, more than almost anybody else, relies on it for maritime shipping, to go from like one side of the United States to the other, right? Or to go from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean and vice versa. It's an engineering feat. America is responsible for constructing it. It's also responsible for the imperialist context in Latin America within which it constructed it, right? So Trump recognizes, I mean, he smells a chance for a fucking land grab, right? Dispossession. I'll say more about that in a second, maybe. But he calls it in this tweet, it's a vital national asset for the United States, right? He says securing the Panama Canal, it's essential. There's nothing like to say vital national interest or vital national asset. That's like the utmost, we will kill anybody for this kind of thing, right? And you can say it's rhetoric or whatever, but he's laying down markers that everyone in his administration is then going to have to act on, you know? So this is troubling. It's problematic. Also, just as a small thing, he says in here that the Panama Canal was built with 38,000 American men dying in the process. Just as a factual point, that's not true. It was 5,600 people died, 5,609 people died, and they were mostly Caribbean recruits. So, Bahamas and Jamaica, it was people from there, not from the United States, who died. So a bunch of fucking nonsense. I'm not going to fact check Trump. What would be the point of that? But this imperial thing is very real. And if you're wondering where it's coming from, again, like, I'm not throwing shade. He's talking about colonizing another currently sovereign nation. You know what I mean? But I say I'm not throwing shade because, like, I mean, where I'm from politically, to call out imperialism is an epithet. It is a pejorative, as it should be. But it's also a structure. It's like it's objectively something that you can identify. So that's something that we should look for when we start seeing indicators of it happening, you know? And with Trump and with this Panama Canal shit, it isn't new. So the newsletter post about this that I've got goes into this deeper if you want to go deeper. But basically, like 2 weeks ago, he threatened to annex Mexico and Canada. At first, he like mentioned it as a joke, but then he said it again, and he said it much more seriously, right? In the Trump administration, he talked about buying Greenland, and then there was just let me see this. He just now, and this is what fucking is like beyond belief for me. Just now, said, as part of announcing some political appointments, and I'll say more about that too in a second. Um, Here we go. He's announcing Ken Howry, whoever the fuck that is, right? Actually, he's a VC guy. I'm almost positive. He's one of the tech oligarch types. And yeah, so in the in this fucking tweet, he mentions that this appointee is really important for acquiring Greenland, which seems like nonsense. So you see at the end of the tweet here, for purposes of national security and freedom throughout the world, not just national security, but freedom throughout the world. The United States of America feels that the ownership, oh my God, and control of Greenland is an absolute necessity. Okay. So he's going to wage war on Mexico, like at the pretext of going after the cartels or going after China, who supplies the fentanyl, right? He's gonna annex Mexico and Canada, annex Greenland, annex the Panama Canal. This is, and then like, in the intellectual space of the national conservatives and the MAGA folks, he was talking during the campaign, not him, Vivek Ramaswamy, who's now part of this Doge bullshit with Elon, a bunch of the Marco Rubio, some of these cabinet nominees, right? The people who are running against him in the GOP primary. These guys were talking about a Monroe Doctrine 2.0, right? So U.S. foreign policy is primacist. It's primacist at a global level. It rests, no matter what a president decides, the entire foreign policy architecture rests on an assumption of American military superiority globally, dominance, right? And what the Trump, and for Democrats and for normal Republicans historically, that involves a number of I don't know, arrangements, alliances, institutions, occasionally treaties, it's in service of a structural domination or an ability to dominate globally. But what Trump is arguing for is still primacist, but the alliance part is, as Steve Bannon said during the first Trump term, alliances are protectorates, right? Everything is a deal. Everything is a land grab. Everything's transactional, So you hear a lot of talk about nationalism and nationalist foreign policy and shit, but that's happening within, or that's like not happening within, it's justifying an imperialist foreign policy, which shouldn't be odd to you. Like nationalism and imperialism is like peanut butter and jelly. Like the European nations thought that in the 19th century, in the early 20th century, and the US, that their national self-determination justified the colonization and subjugation of everyone else, of the darker races. You know what I mean? And so, like, one man's nationalism is another man's imperial subjugation. That's fucked up. That's why we tried to move on from this bullshit. But that's also precisely what Trump is about. And if you go back to that undiplomatic newsletter piece that I wrote, I talk about how Trump was bragging and about admiring Teddy Roosevelt and his role in the Panama Canal. And Teddy Roosevelt is, of course, maybe the most famous imperialist in American history, like a proud imperialist, not one who denies it even. So that's kind of fucked, right? So imperialist foreign policy, you're going to keep seeing it over and over again, right? The thinking about Trump's work with Gaza, Saudi Arabia trying to isolate Palestine, Abraham Accords, right? You isolate Palestine, you facilitate Israel's genocide of Palestine, and what does that get you? Well, it gets you more fucking land. You know what I mean? If you erase a people from their land and then you go in and occupy it and create development deals and send fucking Jared Kushner in, well, you have just that's primitive accumulation, right? It's a kind of pre-capitalist mode of getting the bag, of securing the bag. And it's like the most brutal bare knuckle version of of the exploitation and dispossession that goes on in just normal capitalism. It's a regression to something even worse. And that's scary, but also kind of inevitable. Again, in the Undiplomatic Newsletter piece that I mentioned, let me just throw it up there for the sake of throwing it up there. In this piece, it's talks about why this is happening. Like I've given talks about this before. It figures a little bit into the book I have coming out next month, but like we live in a world of lower global growth, declining global growth, right? So like in the neoliberal globalization period, it was like a rising tide lifts all boats. That was the sort of attitude. Tom Friedman, the world is flat, all this fucking bullshit, right? That is not how shit is anymore. Like there are pockets of multinational corporations, of globalization sort of fetishizers still. There are still multinational corporations who benefit from like a global trade architecture and the ability to move cash around and shit. But like in a world of declining growth, what you inevitably see is states with power use that power to secure the bag for the interest groups in their nation, for the ruling class in their nation. And if you happen to be a fucking oligarchy, and America is a functional oligarchy that just happens to have elections, then the interest groups and the ruling class that you're serving is the fucking oligarchs. It's the ruling class. It's going to be foremost tech elites, financial elites, apparently fucking crypto bros too. So that's the brave new world that we're entering in. But because we've been in a world of declining growth and secular stagnation of growth for such a long time, this is where great power competition comes from. China in 2015 announces this like made in China 2025 shit. I'll talk about this more some other day. I don't want to get into it now, but like that was basically like state-led capitalism. It was like, look, the areas of important growth for the Chinese economy and for Chinese national security, that shit needs to not be vulnerable to like American meddling, Western meddling, global supply chains, all that stuff. So we need to make sure that we lead in these areas. That means state-driven investment and all that bullshit. And so they moved. It's like, made in China 2025. That's announced in 2015. That's state-led capitalism. That's industrial policy hardcore. That's focusing on the important tech sectors and all that bullshit. Less than 2 years later is when America announces great power competition, which is a hollow phrase, but basically means rivalry with China. And that becomes the sort of intellectual framework for everything America does with the national security state. Everything we've been doing the last 8 years has been under the guise of great power competition, which is nothing less than military primacy and then making sure that we do our own version of Made in China 2025. Call it America first. That's that bullshit. right? We're mirror imaging fucking China. You know what I mean? And like that's bad and it's avoidable and it's something that, but it's also kind of inevitable. Like I think we can choose different policies, but this is, you know, maybe, you know, has a historical materialist interpretation to it. So forgive me if that's not your flavor, but that kind of interpretation of what's happening suggests that it was inevitable that it was America was going to go into this industrial policy stuff, the America First stuff, stoke ethno-nationalism, you know, because it serves the ruling class in America, which is the oligarchs and the tech bros. So that's where we're at now. It's pretty fucked, you know? And so in a world, the reason why I'm saying all this in the context of the imperialist foreign policy stuff is because great power competition itself, Sino-US rivalry, is imperialist competition. It's inter-imperial rivalry, right? And so their respective countries, these are the two biggest countries in the world system, and they're trying to get the bag for their respective nations, except it's always necessarily the case that when states and politicians are trying to get the bag for their quote unquote nation, it ain't never, fucking never, to the benefit of everyone in the nation. It's almost never to the benefit of the majority of the nation. It's about serving interest groups within the nation that align with political power and preferences. And that's what we're fucking on. That's the shit we're on now. So that's what Trump's doing. You know, there was a way in which this was happening under Biden too. You know, Bidenomics paid off one section of capital. Sort of, it was kind of forsaken the working class in the process. And it's Trump is just doing it more nakedly now, and he's doing it for like maybe a different section of capital. You know, like Elon and those bros are definitely going to get paid. They're definitely going to be the key beneficiaries of all this stuff, you know? So this is fucked. And that's the imperialist foreign policy stuff, right? There's a second thing to be concerned about, which, or like the second piece of news, which is Elbridge Colby. I don't know how many of you guys even like know who he is, but Bridge. So he's been nominated as the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy to serve Trump just announced it, to serve his like America First defense strategy or whatever. It's like military primacy. So I wrote another thing about a month ago about Bridges' record, because I used to work. I know him. We're not friends. I used to work with him though. So like in another life, when I was a totally different person, I worked at a major national security think tank that was like the political hotness at the time, and Bridge worked there too. And I was like the Democrat, he was like the Republican in a way, you know. And we had some convergences because again, it was a warmongering think tank and he's a warmongering dude, and that was, I can't say that I wasn't at that time. I didn't think of myself at that way at that time, but you know, it's warmongery vibes. And I've clearly fucking changed, but Bridge, from day one that I've known him, he's always focused on nuclear superiority, nuclear primacy. He was a very early mover from Russia is evil to Russia is fine / who cares, but China is evil. And basically, like, ever since I went into academia and left that shit behind, he has tripled, quadrupled down on all of that, you know. So he has basically said that China is the sole thing that matters in this universe. It's the priority mission that America must be able to win via military domination, right? He 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 wouldn't phrase it that way, but that's what's going on when he talks about this stuff. And he has a paper trail longer than my arm. You know what I mean? So, his book talks about this. He frames it, he packages it as like the stupid Roman adage, which is bullshit. If you want peace, prepare for war. He frames it as like strategy of denial, which is actually literally a misnomer. Like what denial means in strategic contexts is not how he uses it. He calls it strategy of denial, but his strategy involves launching like tons of missile strikes against the Chinese mainland, among other things. So it's like there ain't no that's not a denial implies like a defensive posture, and that ain't what that is. So and then in the process, he has like he's halfway alienated himself from Washington, and he's halfway ingratiated himself with Washington. His grandfather was Bill Colby, the CIA director, right? Who had been involved in some like extremely nefarious shit in our country's history. His great grandfather or great great grandfather is actually his namesake, also named Elbridge Colby, and he wrote a super infamous like law journal article defending savage wars or something like that. I might try to pull it up if I have time here, actually, but it's about justifying like different laws of war for whether you're a civilized people or a savage people, right? And so it was kind of like thinking about war in relation to imperial structures. Like, of course, if you're going to have colonial subjugation and racial hierarchy and a global color line, well, you should have different expectations for how you wage war. You wage war against the barbarians in barbaric ways. This is obviously super fucking racist. You know what I mean? So, anyways, that's a gem. And I'm not going to put, his ancestors bullshit on him, but this is all to say that like, this is ruling class stock. This is ruling class American aristocracy shit. Like about as blue blood as it gets in America, Vineyard Vines vibes, which like I'm not down with, obviously. So fucking, but like on the substance, critique his vibes all you want. On the substance, I have this belief / theory that like he argues for maximalist, highly militarist positions on China and for the equivalent of nuclear arms racing on nukes to go with that. And he often claims that not only is this supposed to be in the name of, peace or whatever, which is deranged and like a kind of perversity argument, but he does it and says at the same time that like everything else is a subordinate priority. And so of course, domestic politics, democracy, equality, anything that we would care about and value in a good society, the common good, labor, working class power, any of that stuff must be subordinated to the grand geopolitical challenge, which there's always some grand geopolitical challenge for people like this. But right now, it happens to be China, and that's the easy one to stoke. You know what I mean? So he's leaned into that. He literally makes a living off of this. He's got a LLC or whatever, like a consulting firm that's strictly about, preparing for war with China. So that's not great. But hold on one second. The thing about these live streams is I still need water. You know what I'm saying? So anyways, Bridge, where was I? China. When he makes these arguments, he says usually that everything else is subordinated. And what that can sometimes seem like is that he's willing to accept peaceful positions or restraint-based positions on certain issues, like, for example, on Ukraine, a lot of Ukraine heads think he like sells out Ukraine or he's in Putin's pocket, but he advocates for negotiations and for like limiting weapons transfers to Ukraine, right? and you can read that in numerous ways, but like some people read that as like an anti-war pitch, and his reasoning is not necessarily peace. It's because he thinks the priority is China and everything ought to go to that. But some of his positions get read in a sort of anti-war way, and that's a good example of it, the Ukraine thing. But it's kind of bullshit, because to the extent he has any expertise, it's only on the defense strategy stuff and the budgeting and everything. And like on that, it's all about China, and it's a maximalist position. It's always a maximalist position. And so my thinking, like the way I've viewed his project for a long time, is that he gets to be the guy, the quote unquote expert, the voice box for the maximalist China uber hawk shit. And then what ends up happening is that he's not an expert on Iran. What he says about Ukraine doesn't generally matter. He has no thoughts about Latin America. You know what I mean? And so other voices and other interest groups that are no less hawky, the John Bolton of Latin America, the John Bolton of Iran, the John Bolton of fucking Russia shit, whatever, like those people on other issues where they're experts get to be the maximalist position havers, the Uberhawks. And he's never going to argue with any of them. He's only going to argue for the maximalist position against China. And it just happens to be that since China is the next greatest power in the world system, if you develop a strategy and capabilities and everything to beat China, everything else in the world is a lesser included case. And this is the mind of like a defense strategist. And I was one, so like I can say this with the kind of authority, like it's something I lament and critique in many ways now, but that's how they think. And so you focus on the greatest challenge, because the greatest challenge assures you primacy globally if you can resolve it. The problem is you're trying to resolve it, quote unquote, for people not seeing this video, I'm fucking air quoting. You cannot, you're trying to resolve it by military force, by military superiority, by structural domination. And these are political, like, China-Taiwan shit is a political problem. It doesn't have no fucking military solution. So this is how you end up justifying greasing the skids to World War III. Like, how could it be that great powers end up in a self-destructive cycle that takes the rest of the world down with it? Well, there's an actual grammar to that way of thinking, that disgusting, fucked up way of thinking. And it's the grammar of the defense strategist. And there's no picture perfect exemplar better than Bridges' arguments about this kind of stuff, So he's not going to be lobbying anyone for a peaceful policy on Iran. He's not going to be lobbying anyone for, peace in Latin America or something like that. He's just going to be investing all his time in making the maximalist case for China, and then let other hawks win out on all the other issues. You know what I mean? So that's where we're headed. And if you want to know his advocacy, like, well, what is his actual feeling about various political issues? Maybe he's just a geopolitician that has no political thoughts. First of all, geopolitics is politics, and if it's not anti-colonial, then it's fucking racist. That's straight up. But also, he has, and I talk about this in the UnDiplomatic Newsletter thing I did about him like a month ago, or about his record. He has called labor activism in the context of semiconductor manufacturing. He's called it wokeness, said we don't have time for it. He implied it was a national security threat, right? He has said specifically that if China attacks Taiwan, he said this publicly, we should attack Taiwan too. You get that? You get that? Is that not fucked? That's fucked, dude. It's so fucked. The reasoning, because there is reasoning, there's always reasoning, is that, of course, Taiwan is the focal point, the center of gravity for the world's semiconductor manufacturing. We're trying to diversify away from that so that we're not as necessarily committed to Taiwan's defense, which is a whole separate issue to debate. But he thinks that as long as Taiwan remains this lodestar for semiconductor manufacturing, we cannot afford to have it fall into China's hands. So if China attacks Taiwan, America ought to destroy Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing. He's like written about this publicly, tweeted about it. You know what I mean? He's been on the anti-wokeness shit, I said, in the context of labor activism, but also on like the bunch of gender commentary about, like, in the same vein as Pete Hegseth, you know, like they just think that like gender diversity is a thing that's like, you know, weakening morale. DEI is for, I don't know, globalists or something like that. And so there's a track record, again, longer than my fucking arm, about all this stuff. And it now that he's getting nominated for Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, any thorough sort of vetting process is going to turn up all this stuff, you know, and his record is going to be laid bare. The thing is, it's not going to stop him from getting actually confirmed, actually appointed. That's totally going to happen because he has not, as far as I can tell, committed any like sins. He's not on the wrong side of Trump MAGA. He was he was one of the foreign policy elites who was earliest on the MAGA train. You know, that's actually why people used to compare me and him so much, because he was like, oh, you're the left bridge, or he's like, I am to Bernie what he is to Trump, kind of thing, you know. And I don't love that comparison at all, actually. But like, it's coming from the people who make it are doing it from the place of like thinking of Bridge as part of that technocratic foreign policy class, but who sort of went political. And that is it's to our detriment as a society, but it's to his credit in terms of his savvy as an analyst and as an operator in Washington, because the thing that he and I both have in common, aside from this you know, think tank that we worked at, is very much that like he recognizes and I recognize that all policy happens within a political context. And the way that foreign policy gets talked about and debated and massaged and evaluated and talked about in the media and shit, like the way national security policy exists, there's always this pretend thing where the analyst or the advocate strips out the politics as if it didn't matter, when the politics is the only thing that matters. And the national security policy itself is the instrumentality of realizing the politics. And this is so fucking obvious to me. And it's why I operate on like a different plane of existence than the average foreign policy analyst, you know, not throwing shade, but like, it's just, this is just the one of the key differences between me and everybody else, it seems like, is that I recognize policy is serving politics. It's an instrument of it. And so we have to take that into account. And for me, that means that asking who benefits and who is harmed by what we fucking do, by what the national security state does, because and the track record speaks for itself. Very few benefit concretely from what the national security state does most of the time, but many, 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 many people suffer for what the national security state does most of the time. And this is at the core of my politics, you know. Bridge, he gets that too. He doesn't want to face the who benefits and who is harmed question by policy. He is invested, as reactionaries and conservatives have always been invested, in obscuring precisely who benefits by the actions of the state, because then that would give the game away. You know what I mean? And that's why conservatives and reactionaries have a deep, deep fetish for the nation, because the nation is the fuzziest goddamn object that's ever existed. And it allows you to claim that that what the state takes and does on behalf of a ruling class that accrues to the benefit of a ruling class, that shit is for the nation. It's the national interest. It's national security. You know, what they're doing is securing the bag for the few on the backs of the fucking workers who got to eat shit, you know? Anyways, I bring up the bridge thing because I saw this coming a mile away, but it really punctures the myth. If there was any doubt about Trump as the anti-war guy, the anti-war president, the peace president, you know, if there's any talk about a goddamn Nobel Peace Prize the next 4 years, I don't know what I'm going to do. But like, this is straight up imperialism, you know, and to go back to the whole like Panama Canal, Greenland, Mexico, Canada, all this annexation shit. I talked about Sino-US rivalry as being inter-imperial rivalry, you know, strong national states trying to secure the bag for their quote unquote nation, right? Because they're trying to claim a larger share of a shrinking economic pie. The thing that I don't think I mentioned during that earlier rant was that the nation and imperialist foreign policy, imperialism creates hierarchy. It creates it's a system of exclusion. And one of the ways that you can continue accumulating capital in a world of declining growth, of a shrinking pie, how do you continue accumulating capital? Well, it's probably not going to be by investing in fucking AI, which is this, you know, jerk off jump the shark technology. You know, it's like Silicon Valley is always chasing these unicorns, but this is basically gambling. This is not a reliable source of securing the bag. The way you accumulate capital in a world of shrinking growth is that state power. It's not just through great power rivalry. You know, a much easier way than great power rivalry to secure the bag in a world of shrinking growth. It's fucking dispossession, resource extraction, exploitation on hierarchical grounds, on the grounds of like, these guys are the wrong religion, these guys are the wrong race, you know? That's what we're moving toward. That's the scary fucked up shit, you know? And so imperialist foreign policy pays. How does it pay? Through dispossession. That's some bare knuckle primitive accumulation shit, you know? And that means that war is necessary. The deployment of force is necessary. You know, Smedley Butler, the famous Marine general, he wrote this little pamphlet, War is a Racket. Everyone needs to go read that shit. You know, we're in the war is a racket era. Defense strategy on behalf of the nation, supposedly, it's going to be a bunch of land grabs and land deals. You know what I mean? People are going to eat shit for it. And who's going to benefit? The Doge boys. You know what I mean? The Silicon Valley bros. So I'm feeling good. I don't know about y'all. All right. I'm going to call this quits for today, but I've got a scheduled live stream. The Twitch, on the Twitch website for Undiplomatic Podcast, there's a schedule of just to try to keep a reliable live stream expectations. But I'll also jump on from time to time to you know, speak my piece like this. And of course, if you want to support this shit, UnDiplomatic Newsletter, un-diplomatic.com, un-diplomatic.com. That's the newsletter, y'all. All right. Take care. Peace.